Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is episode 3 in our series on the art of game design by Jesse Schell.
Hello, John. How are you doing?
Hey, Matt. I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I am doing all right. Ready for the next episode in the Art of Game Design series?
The next 3 chapters, yes.
I know, it's always intense. I don't know, like when we have the reading assignment, feel like...
Scrambling the night before.
Oh, exactly, yeah. Or like the morning of, maybe. While we're doing episode prep.
So today we have a very special surprise, right?
Yes, this is an exciting episode. Brave new territory for
big
Switch
milestone
Statement.
for Switch Statement, yeah.
So our first guest, we are very excited to welcome Mike McGibbon, CEO of Math Chops and NYC tutor for how many years? 18 years at this point?
Maybe like 20. Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm very excited to talk to you about games and math.
Nice.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So good to have you.
So just to explain, like we'll still go through the content of the chapters, probably talk about it through the lens of Mike's experiences. But maybe if you want to give like a little bit of an intro about Math Chops and about your background, your relationship to game design, because you obviously have a lot of experience with this. So.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, I'm a tutor. I've been doing that for about 20 years, like I said, and the problem is to get students to practice a lot so that their scores will come up. So Math Chops is a game that basically helps kids get higher scores faster than they otherwise would, and it makes it a little bit more fun for them. So, they'll start at like a low level, like 330, and then they play this main challenge, and as they play the challenge, the score goes up, and if they get stuck, then they can kind of play these other mini challenges to sort of acquire skills and then go back to the main challenge. And
when you say 330, you're talking about like an SAT score?
Right, thanks. Yeah, so depending on the test, like it'll be a really low level within that test score. So like a 330 for the SAT or like a 13 for the ACT. And so this game, like the level challenge, for example, like if they get 6 right before they get 3 wrong, then their score is going to go up. But that game gets harder as you go along. Like a timer gets introduced, and I'm sure we'll talk more about the elements later. But there's a timer. The questions are harder. You have to answer more of them, so they kind of will get stuck. And the thing that's pretty cool about it, I think, is that when you get stuck, that's a really good score prediction for the actual test. So as students are practicing, they start to realize like, okay, there's a really strong correlation between this Math Chops score and my real score. So I can just kind of stay in Math Chops world, practice there, which is a little bit more fun, and then go back to like the real world of ACT or SAT and have a higher score.
Awesome. So they think they're playing games, but they're actually studying for a test, which is going to positively affect their whole entire life.
Well, it's funny. That was the dream. I don't think that that's the reality. I think the reality is that they are only interested in that score going up. And so you kind of have to I don't think you can ever go too far from, we're definitely going to improve your score. But if you make it fun within that context, then, I would say it's kind of like I played the trumpet really seriously for a long time. It's like, if you told me like, here's this new trumpet teacher, and we're going to have like a wizarding world for the trumpet, and you can earn prize. I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I want to be able to play, higher, faster, for longer, with a better tone. If you can't help me with any of that stuff, I'm not interested. But
I don't know, wizarding world about the trumpet. That sounds strangely interesting.
Right.
That is the next, blockbuster film franchise waiting to be made.
I know.
Like, we have a wizarding world about programming. I would totally get into that.
But I think like once I'm taking the lesson, if that person can make it fun within the lesson, and there's some like little challenge, suddenly that's great. Oh, this is such a great teacher. They're making this thing fun. So it's kind of like, I think the practice has to come first, but within that you want to make it as fun as possible. So
yeah. So they still know that they're working, but it's a little bit more fun than, or I should say a lot more fun probably, than like sitting down and, manually going through like a worksheet or something.
Exactly. And like I say, that was something it took it took me a while to accept. I tried to like, I was hoping kids would just kind of get lost in the fun of playing math games, but that's just, I basically had a nice, honest student kind of tell me point blank that I was like crazy and that no one would ever respond to the game that way. I think for younger kids maybe, but the older ones, no. So, because they're just so stressed out and busy, so.
And Matt and I should mention that we helped implement a lot of these games,
Yes.
which was
That's
a super.
right. Yeah, full disclosure, we have worked on Matchops.
Yeah, more than
Yeah,
worked
yeah.
on. Yeah. So I mean, I'm sure throughout the podcast I'll be saying we, and it's not like a royal we. It's like actually the three of us that I'm referring to. So.
Well, but and I wanted to say this is one of the reasons we were so excited to have you on. Like the minute we started going into this book, we were like, we got to get Mike on here because you were kind of the heart and soul behind a lot of the game ideas of Matchops. And, we were the guys implementing the ideas and kind of iterating on them and stuff. But having you as part of this conversation, talking about the design and theme and aesthetics and stuff,
Yep.
I just think it's going to make it a lot more of an enriching or gratifying experience for the listener. So
Awesome.
Just really excited to have the three of us here at the same time.
I'm excited to get into it.
All right. So then, yeah, I think that's the perfect segue to dive into the topics of these chapters. So to talk about the first one, this chapter is called "The Game Consists of Elements," and I guess in the last chapter we just introduced the idea of like the game itself. Like, we have gotten through the journey of like experience and all these things, and now we're at the game and kind of talking about the parts that make up a game. And so he kind of gets into what makes up a game, mechanics, story, aesthetics, and technology. And so I think it might be interesting to kind of view Matchops through those components. Like, we don't have a ton of story, if in Matchops games. Maybe that's what we're missing. Maybe we need more of a.
Well, maybe the story is your life's going to get better. Maybe that's kind of the underlying narrative.
Yeah, I would say it's funny. It's the story is kind of like you're a challenge basically. Like we have the thing of like the mountain climber. That's sort of like our main image, and I think that's pretty appropriate if you had like monsters periodically coming to attack you on the mountain. Because you kind of have to like beat this level, and then you get up to a next level, and then you have to beat it again. So it's sort of. I think what's challenging about the story is that it's sort of like in movies there's sort of a montage, like Karate Kid, where they have to go and like learn all the skills, and now he can like beat the bully or whatever. And that's the part that is always fast forwarded in the story, like because in real life people don't enjoy just practicing hour after hour, And so, but I think that kind of is our story. It's sort of like, okay, I've got this big problem, I've accepted it, I want to work. And I'm going to make it as fun as possible, but I'm going to like get all these awesome skills and then go back and like beat these monsters basically. So, but like you say, I think that's something we could definitely do a much better job of like, I'm not sure that story is super obvious to the user while they're playing the game. So
it is interesting though. And like, I don't want to pull, like this is a slightly different direction. I did want to mention just other games.
Yeah.
But he mentions how these four elements are equally important, which I do agree in a sense that they're equally important. But I also think that one or two of the elements can be like, more developed than the other four or the other three, and that's totally fine. Like to me, saying they're equally important suggests that there's a similar amount of like effort and development on all of them.
Right.
But to me, I think as long as there's harmony between them, that's what makes a great game. And actually, I would even argue that some of these aren't nearly as important. Like technology, I don't see that as that important to a game.
Yeah.
As long as the technology is harmonious and enables the player to like play the game as you expected, like you've achieved the goal. I would say mechanics are kind of by far the most important of the four of these.
It's interesting because, as per usual, I'm sure that Jesse Schell is using technology very expansively here, where it's like he's not talking necessarily about like
the tech stack.
the text, or like it's really important that you use the right tech stack, as much as like it's important that, you know, because the technology could be like paper, you know what I mean? It could be
Right.
like literally the medium that it's printed upon. I would argue that his premise is probably that you should give all of these like some consideration. Like
Yeah.
you really can't ignore any one of these, and it's okay. It's actually okay if you say, you know what, story is not important for this game, which I think like Math Chops, like, and I don't know that we explicitly made that decision, but I think it would have been reasonable for us to consider it and just to kind of set it aside as something that we're not going to spend as much time. So I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you all think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, and I think this will be something that keeps coming up as we're talking about it. Like a big challenge that we have with our players or our users is that they don't want to perceive it as a game or like a frivolous thing that they're doing. So if you put the story too front and center, they'll be like, look, I could be studying for AP history right now. I could be like, you know, taking a math practice test. Like, I don't want to be in a story, right? I'll go do Fortnite if I'm going to do that. So it really has to be like a hidden story almost, you know, if
Yeah.
you're going to do that. One technology thing that is super important, like absolutely critical to the game, is just how fast and responsive the site is. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if there is even a 2-second delay at any time, kids are just like, what is happening? I'm out. Like, what's going on here? Like, it has to be lightning fast at all times, and it has to be like very clean and like clear what they're supposed to do next. And so in that aspect, it's very, very important. Yeah.
I think that is the spirit of what he is talking about. Like, whatever your technology is, it has to give a good user experience. Like,
Yep.
it can't, like,
Right.
if it's, you know, if it's these wooden pieces, they can't be like rough or feel like, I don't know, not well made. They need to be high quality. And it's like, whatever that medium is, it should be kind of intentional.
But the technology, I was going to ask you guys, like, if this would count as technology, because I think one thing that's really just critical to Math Chops is the fact that we were able to connect, like, the game score to a real score on a test, basically using, well, lots of different methods, but, you know, ultimately it's based on psychometric theory, you know, but the sort of, I kind of consider that a technology. I don't know if I should, if that's more like an idea, but I think like the game really wouldn't work if like a 590 on our game didn't match a 590 on the test. I don't think anyone would play it.
This is something that I think I sometimes get confused about because I see so many things as mechanics, and I'm
Yeah.
sure other people would argue that they're one of the other three things. But I think I would put that in the mechanic category. I guess it is achieved through technology, and I don't mean to be pedantic
Yeah.
because I do think like that is super duper important to Math Chops.
This is something he goes into a decent amount in an earlier chapter where he's like, there has to be some kind of internal reward system, you know, that has to be useful within the context of the game itself. Crucially, what we're doing to like incentivize students is actually tie that back to this real world value that they're going to get, like they're going to be able to use in their own life. And so in a way, I think that's kind of what makes Math Chops work, is that the kind of in-game currency, if you will, you know, is very useful to them, you know, is intrinsically useful to them, I guess.
Exactly. And I think that was like a frustrating restriction for us at first, to be like, like we have all these games that we think are fun, or like little mechanics, like, okay, you're going to earn these points and then you'll be able to cash in these points for avatar rewards or things like that. And people were mostly ignoring them and only paying attention to the score. But then in a way, it does kind of free you up when you realize, okay, they really do care a lot about the score. So if we can connect things to that score, we can keep them interested and help them more. And so I think like one aspect of the site are these category challenges, you know, where you can like get stuck at level 590 and then go play like linear equations 590 or system of equations 590. And those have been like really popular because they're connected to a score, but they're also improving specific skills. So I was kind of skimming the earlier chapters. I know they're talking about like listening to your users and iterating, and I think that's like a really good example of us sort of doing that in real time, you know, with our own user base. But again, kind of tapping into this story that they're already a part of outside of the game, which is I have this test score and I want it to be higher, you know.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. One of the things I was getting out of this, and this is like a weird way to put it, but I think mechanics has to be what drives the game, and the other three things have to be like good enough, basically, to make sure that it doesn't kind of detract from the overall experience. And, you know, there's obviously cases, like I thought of Myst. I don't know if listeners remember this ancient game called Myst, but it basically has like no mechanics. Like it's all just aesthetics. You know, I would say story. I guess technology. I mean, it was kind of a technological marvel at the time, but that's like a very rare case where mechanics kind of takes a back seat to the other elements. I would say ordinarily mechanics is up front and center, most important thing to the gamer. And if anything, the other things can be like intentionally bad. And I put bad in quotes.
Yeah.
You know, games have like retro style pixel graphics or something, which often are amazing on their own. I'm not trying to like downplay that sort of thing, but the point is the aesthetics reach a point where they harmoniously service the game, but maybe they're not as honed as the mechanics, which I think are, you know, by far the most important part to most games.
What do you view as a mechanic, John? Like, especially since it's like, or as you put it, like the most important, it's kind of like the primary part of a game. So like,
yeah, I think a mechanic is any interactive thing in the game. And I wrote down a bunch of examples of this because I was trying to figure out what I think a mechanic even is. And it's basically anything that, you know, where the gamer takes an action, or the user or whatever, and it affects what happens. Like it could be, you could take an action and it affects the music of the game. Like I actually think that's a mechanic. I was thinking about one of my favorite games, Super Metroid, where one of the greatest things about that game is just atmosphere. And I was asking myself, is that aesthetics or is that mechanic? And I actually think it's kind of both. I mean, the aesthetics in Super Metroid are amazing, but there's also these times where you drop into a room and the music turns off. And it's terrifying because you know that something crazy is going to happen. And I think that that's definitely aesthetics, but I also think it's mechanical. You know, you're taking these actions and these, you know, big shifts are happening in the experience. So I think to me, mechanics has a very broad definition that probably is wrong, frankly. But this is just kind of how I've always thought of mechanics. I do think there's these super important mechanics in Math Chops, like the question answer, which is just this like very quick, you know, you can sit there with your fingers on the numpad and the enter button, and you can kind of like get in the zone in Math Chops.
Yep.
Like new question pops up, and you know, you solve it on paper or whatever in your head, and you do the numpad and enter. And I think the user experience is just nice. It flows. It's not perfect, but you know, I think we spent a lot of time trying to get it so that it felt pretty good. We've done a lot of work on that answer input text so that it's like nice on the phone, and I think that's just so important, and that's all mechanics. And I think that it's part of what, you know, hopefully part of what our users enjoy is like that time that we've spent honing those mechanics.
Yeah, and I don't know if how much of this counts as mechanics, but I think there are a lot of things in the site where I want to reward users for having certain skills or being able to do certain things. And so, I mean, all the action in the game is driven by getting a right answer, and it's usually driven by getting the answer a certain way. So you might have a question where, like, if you do it one way, there's no way. Like, for example, if they say, like, what's the sum of the roots of this quadratic equation? And if you try to factor it, it's just impossible. You won't be able to do it in a minute. But if you do, like, this sort of formula, you can do it in like 5 seconds. And so it's like rewarding you for knowing certain things. Like that one, for example, if you had read the explanation, you'd probably get it pretty easily. But if you're just kind of like burning through and never looking at the explanations, then you'll never get it. So there's a lot of things in this site, I guess, that I thought were important sort of from an educational perspective, and then you're sort of trying to make a game mechanic out of it, or reward them for doing it that way, or acquiring that skill.
Yeah, that's actually, you sort of touched on another mechanic to Math Chops that I think is so important. that the way we generate questions, it focuses on the important aspect of that question. Like a lot of question generation, and I'm not like tooting our own horn here, I just think it's an important mechanic, but a lot of question generation tools like kind of randomize numbers, and sometimes you can get these insane numbers that just the numbers themselves are what's making the question annoying and complicated. But we don't do that. We avoid that. We have a system where, we focus on what's important about that question for the person to know. And the numbers, if anything, are kind of nice. And I think that's a super duper important mechanic.
Yeah, and I think that fits in with what you were saying about like, it being very clean and responsive and quick on all these different devices. I think students, it doesn't have to overwhelm them with like, luscious photographs or anything like that, but it does have to be very clean and precise and accurate. So it's kind of the equivalent. I had some teachers where they would just kind of sit with their arms crossed and wait for you to give them the right answer. And it was just a simple answer. And if you said the right thing, they'd be like, yep, that's right. You can go on to the next one. But if you said anything else, they'd just be like, nope, try again. And that's kind of the vibe. It's sort of like Project Euler. I love that website.
Oh, it's so good.
Where they just give you some, how many Pythagorean triples are there in the first million numbers or whatever. And it's like, there's one answer. And if you get that one answer, then you get to move on to the next challenge. And that is a, I don't know if to call that an aesthetic, or I don't know what you would label it, but that's something that I think students respond to, because once they start to get things right, it builds a lot of confidence. They feel like I don't have any safety net and I'm still getting this right, so.
Well, so he talks about like the skin versus the skeleton, and which is like, okay, right, it's like the presentation versus the kind of how it works, under the hood or like underlying. And I would argue that that's like the skeleton. Like it's not, there's only so many ways you can present such an interface. It's like there's these core decisions that we made about how someone has to respond. Like there's not a multiple choice.
Right.
You can't just randomly pluck one of these 4 answers and just like 25% of the time you'll be right. It's like, no, you need to come up with something. And that was a very, that has been your idea the whole way along, Mike. That like, and I think that was that's crucial to MathChops being such a useful tool.
Yep.
Like, you need to come up with a guess, and like, even if you're just typing in some random number, like, I don't know, it feels like that's a really integral part of it.
Yeah, and it makes
huge. I completely agree.
Yeah, and it makes the score prediction a lot better too. Because you don't have to worry. If someone got it right, that they really knew it. And that makes it easier on our end. But it's funny. That's one of like 2, I don't know, features. I don't know if these would count as mechanics, but that are probably the most controversial among users. So one is the lack of multiple choice, and the other is the timer. And both of them, people are like, they basically just, their initial response is, why isn't this like a regular test? Why doesn't it have multiple choice, and why don't you have this big block of time? But I think in both cases, it makes the game unique, and it makes it so that, if you get something right, you really earned it. And ultimately you can do less work because that right answer is worth more, and that gives us the confidence to be like, you're ready to be bumped up to the next level because you got these 10 questions right or whatever. But would the timer count as a mechanic? It would, right? Or
I think so.
Yeah, that feels pretty core. Like, I think my definition of a mechanic is slightly different from John's, which is that, like, don't get me wrong, I think that music is a really cool example of tying the state of play to their experience, but I do think that does fall into, if I'm doing this broad characterization of skin or skeleton, I would put that in the skin category, like, because the fact that music, I mean, maybe there's psychological effects, but the fact that music stopped doesn't have any impact on like the outcome of the game, aside from maybe your cognitive ability to play the game because you're terrified. But so, like, I think crucially for me, in order for something to be a mechanic, it needs to have the potential, like in the game world, to have an impact on like your ability to accomplish a goal. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a good definition. I think yours is probably like more correct than mine. I sort of recognize that mine is extremely inclusive of like all these other elements. I also just believe, I mean, like you said, there's so many things that are kind of crossovers. Like I think that whole, situation that I talked about with the music stopping, I think that is kind of a crossover. Like if you were forced to bucketize it, maybe it belongs in aesthetics, but it is definitely related to what the user's doing.
For sure. But so then through that lens, like I think the timer is a mechanic because it's definitely an element. Like I mean that's like the broader category. But like, I would argue it's a mechanic because they need like it controls whether or not they get the answer right, which is kind of the core part of the whole interaction.
One thing I wanted to say about the end of the chapter is he had a section where he talked about Space Invaders, which is obviously this amazing game, and he talked about all the these 4 facets of Space Invaders. But then he showed a picture of like the cabinet that you play Space Invaders on. That cabinet was amazing. It has this crazy like hairy monster on the side. I just thought it was so cool.
Yeah, we should be sending a hairy monster with our Math Shop subscription.
We should come up with a cute mascot, or maybe like a terrifying mascot. Apparently, like it worked for Space Invaders, so it should be this like, I don't know,
like a Yeti.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one point that he talks about in Space Invaders that I absolutely love. It doesn't really relate to Math Chops per se, but he talks about how the technology at the time. It wasn't easy to make a multicolored display, like, and so you didn't have like so one resolution, like maybe you could spend tens of millions of dollars and come up with the technology to make a multicolored display, but these engineers were better than that, and they were like, okay, we realized based on the way this game works, the regions of the screen that need a particular color, like they're always the same sections of the screen, so literally they just put like a green film on like the bottom, a red film in the middle, like 70%, and then like a little like red or whatever it is. I don't remember exactly what the colors, but so I just love like, and that's that sort of outside the box thinking that I think I struggle with. And like, I am so impressed when someone can take a step back and be like, wait a minute, like we don't need a full color display for this. Like given the problem, like this could be solved with 3 transparent strips of plastic. And I want to always like keep that in mind.
Yeah. It's that Alexandrian solution to the Gordian knot, which is like, as a software engineer, it's so hard to think of those solutions that are kind of outside of the realm of the software itself. It's always impressive.
All right. So let's move on to the next chapter. So this one was all about theme. So our elements should be supporting a theme, according to Jesse Schell.
I had a question for you guys about this chapter.
Okay.
Do you guys think games will ever be as meaningful as film or literature?
I think they already are for a lot of people.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you're defining a game. Like, I mean, if we can include like sports and chess, like, yes, absolutely, already. I mean, the emotion and the drama, and just like the sense of agency and accomplishment you have when you're part of those games, or even watching those games, definitely, it's different, But I would say it's equal. Yeah.
It is interesting because I think experiences where you're kind of pulled along the narrative and you have no agency, as you mentioned, I like that word, like those experiences tend to be able to like force you into a corner where you feel like really strongly in a certain way, where I think the minute you have agency, you sort of have this ability to like dodge it a little bit. And some games will make you like, I don't know, like kill your own father or something if he turns into a zombie. But it always feels slightly less of like a gut punch than, Sophie talking about the choice she had to make. And I just think, I mean, I love games. I absolutely love games. I think they're so important to my life and so important to so many people's lives. But there is this difference between games and these other art forms, which have the ability to kind of drag you along and throw you into corners and like force you into corners. That's a really hard gap to bridge. And I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's true. But I do think like you get to truly be the hero in a way that you never are if you're reading a story or watching a movie. Like, you know, if you are playing chess against somebody who's really, really good and you win, or tennis, or, you know, even, you know, Math Chops isn't to that level, but I think for people, like, when they've been trying to beat the challenge and trying, and then, like, they go and acquire all these skills, and then they come back, and then they finally win, like, they're very excited. Like, you know, you know, it's a level of excitement they don't get reading Dubliners, even though that's an awesome book, you know, so it's just different,
Yeah, and
you know?
I think that would be my main point, is it's different, because I think the emotional highs and lows can be the same, but it's just in a different way. Like, I've never gotten that feeling of like visceral meaning from a game that I've gotten from, like, you know, reading On the Road, or The Road by Cormac McCarthy, or, you know, William Styron's Sophie's Choice, which is one of my favorite books. That's why I mentioned it. Like, those books left me with this impression that I'll just never forget. Like, it was a total gut punch. And I've definitely played games that made me feel emotions, but there's always something to that agency that allows me to kind of, you know, sidestep it a little bit.
So that's interesting. So it's that your ability to affect the outcome actually reduces your ability to have a strong emotional.
I think so. And this is something I've thought about a ton, because I absolutely love movies and literature. And I think one of the powers of film and literature is they got you by the hand and you can't let go, and they can take you wherever they want to take you. Whereas in a game, a lot of times, you know, you can sort of literally leave in a lot of cases, or you can kind of do certain things in a jokey way that makes it less impactful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I could see there being like VR narratives, and of course, like, if you don't have any control, like, it's arguably not a game anymore, but or it's like a game, but everything you do doesn't have any effect, like, which in a way that could be an you know, an interesting experience, I guess.
Maybe it could be like a Breaking Bad type game where, like, the only way to win is to, like, get evil over time or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that could be. I'm sure there are games that have done that, where it's like you can take this bad route, but, like, there's these, like, negative side effects, and but, like, you become very powerful. So
I feel like that's a thing that's getting, you know, a lot more common in games like Red Dead Redemption. You can go through the game and be nice and help people, but you can also go through the game and just straight up shoot everyone you meet, and you get this reputation meter, and it definitely affects the story and the outcome.
Okay. So he's talking about themes, and, you know, his rules are pretty simple. He's like, pick a theme and just do everything that you can to support that theme. Like, everything should be in support of that theme. And I feel like that's something I've struggled with, is like, I just think of maybe this, like, bag of interesting mechanics. Like, I'm kind of, I think mechanics first, to John's point. And the mechanics don't necessarily, like, they're not coherent. They just, like, are interesting in and of themselves. And so, I don't know, I guess I'd be curious how you all think about theme, and in things you've worked on, or, like, when going about, like, you know, maybe through the lens of Math Chops.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I think for Math Chops, it's like acquiring skills to overcome a challenge. And I think, you know, I love practicing. I think that makes it a little different than most of my students. But, you know, whether it's like playing the piano, or, you know, hitting against a tennis wall or something like that, I kind of like that feeling of just, like, incremental progress. Like, you can tell, like, oh, I finally got that little thing. I can play that a little bit faster, or that's not a problem for me anymore. And, like, you know, that's going to help you with this bigger overall picture of, like, playing the full piece or playing a really good player in tennis or whatever it is. And I think that is, I don't know if this counts as a theme, but it's like, okay, I've got this big challenge. I'm going to go pick up all these skills and I'm going to go back and try this challenge again and I'm going to win, you know? And I think it's like it's a story that I love to be a part of in my own life. And I know everybody doesn't naturally gravitate towards that story, but I think Math Shops is an attempt to bring people in and make it kind of cheerful, you know, like fun is maybe too strong a word, but like just kind of happy practice, I guess, you know, like that's how I think of it.
Yeah, this is something that was kind of a different way of looking at games and developing games, because I have always thought of theme as like a skin that you're putting on mechanics. And yeah, this completely flipped that, which I think with a lot of things in this book, I don't completely agree. I think there's been plenty of games that were just raw mechanics, and then someone hired an artist to like put skin on it, and those games wound up awesome. But I do think that thinking of games this way could yield really cool results. So you know, I'm glad the author mentioned this, because I think I'm gonna use this, you know, way of thinking if I'm designing games. One funny thing in this chapter that he mentioned that I just thought was amusing was at one point he said, weirdly, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride doesn't tell a cohesive story. I just thought that was a funny sentence, because it's like, it's an amusement park ride. Like, is it supposed to tell a cohesive story?
Was that tongue in cheek?
I think it might have been tongue in cheek, but it was interesting because he was talking about the thing that he was working on developing, which was like this crazy. I actually looked it up because it sounded so interesting. It was like this crazy augmented reality experience having to do with Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, it sounded cool.
I thought that. Yeah, it did sound pretty cool. I looked up a few of his things, and like Toontown, for example, is another thing he mentioned, maybe in the next chapter. But highly, you know, critically praised. So I guess this guy knows what he's talking about.
Toontown was a game.
Yeah, it was like an MMO RPG, I guess. I never played it. I'd never even heard of it, but it looks like it was pretty cool. Yeah. You can fight the cogs.
Yeah, I think I agree about what you were saying about the theme, though, earlier, John. It's like, I don't know, maybe I just play all these really old school games, like, you know, sports and cards and chess and stuff like that, but none of them have, like, a super obvious, like, you know, like playing spades or something. Like, I mean, it's a really fun game. I have to think for a minute, like, what the theme is, but I'm sure you could come up with something, you know, but...
Yeah, there's also this element of games or there's a concept of reskinning, where you're essentially taking the same exact mechanics that other games have. Like platformers is a super common example of this. Pretty much all platformers have the same core mechanics, and you're just kind of reskinning it with a different theme and aesthetics. Yeah. So I think a lot of those are cases where, you know, the core mechanics came first, and some great designer just thought of a new way of like thinking about those mechanics.
That makes sense.
I'm very mechanic centric, if you guys can't tell. I just think those are the core of games.
One thing I was going to say, like with the example of spades, I feel like there's few enough mechanics where you don't need a unifying theme, you know, or like there's few enough trappings that like it's fine if there's not some unifying theme. Yeah. I think when themes start to become important is when you do have more, just like more levels or more content or more mechanics. Like that's when it feels like it can just feel like chaotic if the game like doesn't have this, you know, supporting structure. Because I feel like it'll just be confusing.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I'm realizing as we talk that I think our game is much better now that we do have a much better idea of what the user's story is. So I think like initially, at least, I was thinking, well, it'll be this fun carnival and you just come and play any game you want, and when you leave an hour later, you'll magically be better at math. And that was not an appealing story to people. Whereas like the one of like, I am trying to get this score up. If I get stuck, there's like a very specific way I can get better, and I'm going to come right back and get that score up. That is an appealing story, not just to the students, but also to like the tutors who are assigning things to students, and also to parents, you know. So it's although parents are less particular, they're pretty delighted that their kid's doing anything with math. So, but I do think we didn't have a strong sense of like the user's story at the beginning, and now that we do, it's a much better experience for them.
I didn't have a ton I wanted to talk about with this chapter. I did think it was very interesting. But did you guys have anything else you wanted to talk about for this chapter?
Yeah, I mean, this was a pretty short one. I feel like, it's easy to describe and it's difficult to do in practice, because you just need to be really diligent. And I think it can be easy to kind of lose that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's all my thoughts. So I think we can actually, the next chapter is pretty long. So yeah, maybe we can move on to idea.
Let's do it.
Yeah, there was a bunch of lenses in this chapter that I thought maybe we could think about math chops through these lenses.
What were some of the lenses?
The lens of infinite inspiration.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering, I know, Mike, you kind of have a story for the inspiration of math chops.
Yeah, I mean, well, first, I loved the story about the juggler where the guy was like, he just looked different than everyone else in the room. They had this room full of jugglers, and like this one older guy just looked completely different, even if he wasn't the most, technically sophisticated. And he was saying that no one could copy his tricks because he just had these inspirations no one could guess, like ballet or whatever. And I do think with math chops, like there are a lot of outside influences, like, the whole rating system basically comes from chess. And, one of our games, Break the Bank, is a result of a conversation I had with like a friend of mine who's the head of like gaming security at a casino. And I was like, we're going to try to make a gambling game. Like, how should we structure it? And he was saying like, well, pretty much, just straight up, if they bet 3,000, they lose 3,000 or they get 3,000, And so just like playing around with that. But I think, yeah, the main inspiration really was more just to like help kids learn faster, and I had all these educational theories that I wanted to try out. And I think, John, you were kind of more interested in games way back at the beginning than I was. I don't know if you remember it the same way, but I remember us talking about it being...
Well, I remember I always hated studying.
Yeah.
And I was like, how can we make this any easier?
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny. I think like the education, the pedagogical stuff kind of came first, and then it was sort of like, well, how can we sort of almost turn these into mechanics for the game? So like if I want to reward skills, like can I make that an element of the game? Or if I want them to be able to do it quickly, or, things like that. And I think there was really just a lot of iteration trying out different game formats. Like I think we thought that maybe people would like to collaborate, or, they would kind of see that their friends were doing well and that would make them want to work. And totally not the case. It turns out that it's like this weird private thing.
Mm-hmm.
That, it's almost like you're revealing an IQ score or your weight or something like that. It's like really not something they want to share at all, which was a bummer because we have like these really cool multiplayer games. But yeah, I think I don't know. I feel like in a way there's like a lot more that we could do with the games, but it's taken a lot of iteration just to find this kind of like challenge structure that I described.
Yeah. I mean, games are difficult to create.
Yeah. I think one thing that we could do that I think is kind of like a through line from some of the other chapters we've talked about is introduce a so if our theme is incremental progress and we want people to we want to build up structure around that. Like maybe we should, and I think we've talked about this, but like have this as like an earnable thing, collect them all, collect all the skills.
Yeah.
Like I think we've talked about this before where you can actually just like, you can see your mastery. You can see all the question, like the question templates and, Math Chops generates, multiple questions per like question type.
Right.
But so, I don't know, something around that where like making that a core element that they can see and they can say like, hey, here are the things you've mastered. Here are the ones you haven't. Like maybe as you start to see your competencies improve on all of these little micro skills, like that's when you see that your level challenge is gonna grow. Like,
Well, yeah. So it's interesting because, you know, we've taken a step in that direction with the category challenges, you know, where you can earn like the 590 linear equation. But because it is a lot more than 300, it's like, I mean, I think one thing we've talked about from the very beginning that's just been super challenging is just having a map of the domain, you know, like, because the math it's what makes it a really fun challenge, but also very frustrating to implement what you're saying, Matt, because it's like math has this very cool fractal quality to it where, like, you know, like to you guys, probably all these matrix operations are kind of just like one thing. Like, you're very comfortable with matrices, and like, I could ask you a question a bunch of different ways and it's all just kind of one question. Whereas if I show it to one of my students, it's like 20 different questions, and each one would count as like an achievement. And it's so hard. I mean, you know, Khan Academy had this hilarious map of like the math domain that it's like, I think they just dropped it. It was completely impossible to navigate because there were just so many nodes, and you know, you couldn't get a sense of where you were. So this is one of these like white whales for me. I like kind of hope in my life I can come up with a map that is like meaningful to every individual user where you could do something like that. But it's an incredibly hard problem, I think.
You need a map that's almost like a fractal, where it's like as you're zooming in, it's expanding into more and more nodes, because that's kind of how math is. You know, as you said, like some individual question could actually be like 30 separate individual skills.
Right. And the thing is that certain things you'll be really solid, like you guys, for example. I mean, there are certain math skills you know super well, and then there are other ones you just haven't done since high school, and why would you know them, right? So like your personal map would have like just one node for matrices, just for an example, but like, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly all the stuff you guys know, but maybe like, you know, graphing sine waves or maybe some like kind of quadratic trick or something like that. Those would all get kind of broken up and be like separate nodes because you're not really using them on a daily basis, you know. But what's consolidated for a 12th grader in calculus would be completely different because of what they've done recently, you know. So
in this book, and I don't know if you see the chapters, like they have these crazy pictures which are like kind of funny looking in my opinion, but they're working at building up a map of the interrelations between these concepts of game design. And he talks about this, about how like, I'm not going to give you the whole map because you're not going to understand it. And I actually think like, maybe that's the key is like, we don't show, like we have this crazy map like in the back end, but it's this dynamic thing which we can show you a view of, where it's like, we're not going to show you the whole map because it doesn't make any sense to you. It doesn't make sense to anyone because like, unless you're, I don't know, a Fields Medal winner, like you're not going to understand all these concepts or something. Like, but like we'll show you the things, and like maybe just so, I don't know, is the fog of war the right term? But like there's this thing in video games where like you can only see part of like the next regions around you. It's a little bit beyond where you currently have gone. And so I think that could be a useful framework where it's like, oh, like you unlocked this one thing, and that's like, okay, here are 7 new things that like relate to this. As you learn more, some of these things could coalesce into one bubble. It's okay, little skill, little skill, little skill, little skill, little skill, and then you've learned all of these skills to make up this meta skill, and like simplifies the map so you don't have to look at a trillion nodes if you know a decent amount of math.
That would also be an incredibly satisfying mechanic, is like learning all of these sub skills and knowing that they're going to kind of roll up into like a mega skill.
Yeah, like we could, that could be like a big event. It's like, you know, triumphant fanfare.
Well,
clip that. We're going to use that exact sound effect.
So this kind of comes back to an earlier point in an interesting way. So where I was saying like, well, it's been frustrating because people only care about the score, and that's like liberating in a certain way and just incredibly restricting in another way. And I think this idea here or this discussion we're having like illustrates that, because it's like all those things you just described would be awesome as long as the user agrees that those sub skills lead to this higher score. It's funny because we have, you know, all these things we release for Math Chapter, the top 75 questions, or here's the 9 major categories and how many there are in each type. And the number of comments I get from tutors and students like, whoa, what about this category? Are you sure that's the right? I mean, what are you including in that? Well, like the taxonomy discussions that go on are endless. And so it's difficult because if we were able to pull off that kind of carnival story that I was talking about, then you totally could do that, because it's just like, well, they just want to collect stuff, and we get to define what the stuff is. But in fact, they only want the score. So if something is clearly related to the score, then they'll do it. But if not, then they're kind of like, well, why are you forcing me to collect these like weird objects,
Well, hopefully the score could be like some combination of the skills, so we could like, I agree, they care about the score at the end of the day.
Yep.
And so then our job would be to explain to people how the score relates with, the skills. And obviously it's probably not it differs on a test by test basis. Like one particular test is going to have like one set of skills that would require you to get or like, I'm sure it's complicated because like maybe one section and then you get a 330, but then you could know a completely disjoint set and still get a 330. So
yeah, it's a fun and difficult problem for that reason, because I think it's like in making this game, I think the better we understand how math learning actually works, the better the game is, because we can make the form of the game match the form of how people learn. But if you kind of impose something that's arbitrary or just my opinion or your opinion on it, people rebel right away, because they're kind of like, well, you think that's important. I don't think that's important. I just want the score. Get that out of my task list or whatever,
Right.
So I want to say that is like a really fun challenge. So if we could find a way where we're like, oh, actually these components, absolutely, like if you tell me this person got these 5 skills, I know for a fact they're going to get this score. That would be awesome. Then we could start to make that a part of the game,
Right. It's interesting because what this all alludes to is like there's probably some series of practice that someone could do to increase very quickly, but they may not do that because they haven't been convinced that is worth their time to do. Mm-hmm. And so the problem is, okay, what is the best way to practice? And then convince people that is the best way to practice, kind of simultaneously. So
for sure.
All right. I think we're at time. I think we should probably wrap up. This has been awesome.
I just want to say thanks, Mike, for spending time with us. It was really awesome getting to hear your perspective, and really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you all next time on Switch Statement.